Aloha everyone, welcome to this segment on identifying learner needs. Now that you've been introduced to the three domains of learning and have a little bit of a better idea of why it's important to identify learners' needs, let's look at the process for doing so. In today's unit, we're going to look at the three-step process for identifying learner needs. So the first step in this process is the discover step. The second is the validate, and the third step is the classify. Let's learn a little bit more about these three steps. So in a tutoring session, it's essential that you enact the discover, validate, and classify steps. Here's an example of Lehua, our tutor, and Rebecca, a tutee, coming in for some writing assistance. During this session, Lehua should first discover what the tutee's needs are by asking questions. Next, Lehua should validate the student's concerns. And lastly, Lehua should be able to classify or form some type of agenda after negotiating with Rebecca. But you might be asking, hey, that 3 steps seems great, but how on earth do I enact this in a tutoring session? We know from our readings that the first step in really creating a tutoring session is to discover, validate, and classify. So let's learn how to do that. The first step, like I mentioned previously, is discover. And discovering allows you to move towards customizing a tutoring session for each tutee. So we have our example with Rebecca and Lehua again. And Rebecca comes into Lehua and says, hey, I have a writing assignment for my communications course. Can you help me? So the first step that Lehua should do is the discover step. And within the discover step, we should be asking questions. So one question Lehua can ask Rebecca is, how can I help you? Another question, or a couple different types of questions Lehua could also ask Rebecca is, what would you like help with today? Or what are you unsure about? Or what does your assignment ask you to do? These are essential steps or questions in really discovering exactly what the student's needs are. Now, after the discover step, we have to move to the validate step. And within the validate step, validating is all about confirming learner needs, and it helps the tutor to move towards an agreed plan to meet tutee needs. So here's an example with Rebecca and Lehua again. And since Lehua has asked Rebecca, what exactly does your assignment look like? Rebecca might reply and say, my assignment is to create a 15-page research analysis on video games and Americans. Rebecca might also say, but I'm really having a difficult time because I'm so worn out with video games, or I'm just not really sure where to find this research, or, I don't know how to create maybe a thesis statement. So Lehua, in the validating stage, should provide some verbal feedback. Now, the last example I gave was a thesis. So perhaps Lehua might say something like, sounds like you want help creating a thesis. A couple other suggestions in validating is it sounds like you want help with this, or I see you are having a hard time with, maybe X, Y, and Z, or I think you are unsure with. Validating really helps to confirm the student's needs, and it's an essential step in really moving towards then classifying student needs, or in other words, creating an agenda, which is our next step, to classify. Classifying allows you to create an agenda for a tutoring session by connecting a tutee's goals to his or her project, assignment, course, or whatever it may look like. Okay, so we have our tutoring situation with Rebecca and Lehua again. Now within this process, the classifying process, what we want you to do is create an agenda. So now Lehua has identified that Rebecca has to write a communications paper that's about maybe 15 pages or so long, and she's really maybe wanting specific help with her thesis. Lehua, after talking with Rebecca, might say, okay, for today let's focus on how to develop a thesis. A couple other ways to create an agenda might be, today let's focus on these two areas, or in this session I think we should, or let's look at structuring an essay, and if we have time we can try maybe X and Y and Z or whatnot. Classifying is an essential part of creating the tutoring session because it really allows you and the tutee to create a manageable plan to get through the session and also keeps you structured. Now, it's essential, and best practices of literature definitely recommend negotiating an agenda with your tutee. Don't just create an agenda based on what you think the learner's needs are. It is essential that you work collaboratively with the tutee to ensure that you both agree upon an agenda so you're able to move forward with the tutoring session. So let's just briefly go over the process of identifying learners' needs. Now, the discover stage is the first step in the identifying learners' needs process, and when we discover, we can do so by asking questions. Validating is next, and when we validate, we can do so by confirming student needs. And lastly, classification or classify. In this step, we can abide by it by creating an agenda. I hope that you've enjoyed this quick unit on identifying learners' needs, and we wish you happy tutoring.